טוב, שבוע טוב. We have began to speak last week on Rav Yehuda Cohen Kook, the son of the famous Rav Yitzchak Cohen Kook. And what we saw last week is that a part of the technical side, he was born in 1982. Excuse me, of course not. 1891, of course. 1891, and he comes here to Eretz Israel with his father, and mostly he sees himself as a continuation of the project, a continuer of the project of his father, but also a real continuation of his father. And his mission in life is to take the Torah and the teachings of his father and to edit them, to make them accessible, and most important, I think, for him was to make them relatable to the situation in hand. So if Rav Kook was usually speaking on very high plane, on very high realm of ideology, of hashkafa, of philosophy, of thoughts, but Rav Yehuda says, I want to give people a roadmap, how they can take these lofty ideas and realize them in our daily mundane life. Because many times you can learn something that Rav Kook wrote, and it's beautiful, it's inspiring. But then you go out to the street and you ask yourself, how does the rubber meets the road, as they say, right? How does these lofty ideas now can really be realized in a reality in which people are people and situation is situation, and you do not see the light shining everywhere. And that is what Rav Yehuda was up to do. Is one of the main, I think, themes that he had followed throughout his life. We spoke about that a little last week. We would continue to speak about that this week, is to make the separation between the general, the klali, and the individual. And on the general level, he was, you may say, very strict. He was teaching how he saw reality, how he saw things. However, on the individual realm, on the individual plane, he would readily admit that many times we don't understand what exactly is happening, and we need to be open, and we need to be understanding. And by continuing on this, the ability to move in a synchronized way on these two levels. On one level, to have a clear view of the situation at large. But on the other hand, to understand that many times the details are not understandable by us. He was able to really steer the reality to where he believed that it should be moved. Because many of us, I think, get so tangled in the details and we lose sight of the big picture. And he was a man that would not lose sight of this big picture. He understood that not always you can force your understanding of the big picture on the details. But nonetheless, that is something that you should not lose sight of. You should not lose sight of the forest, as they say, because of the trees. So let's see how these things were playing along. However, first we need to speak about the tragedy, and that is, we remember that he was married for our rabbinical heroes on a late stage in his life, at the old age of 31. Now again, for Rabbanim, usually for the people that we're speaking about, they would get married, if not at 14, then at 18, 21, 31 is late. And it's very interesting. He married, as we've spoken about last week, a woman named Chavaleah from Warsaw, a very educated woman, a very also strong-minded, independent. She was a social worker, and after they returned to Yerushalayim, she was working as a social worker in Yerushalayim. And I think I mentioned last week that she was, in order to help the poor people that were not able to buy wood in order to heat their houses for the cold winters of Yerushalayim, she would go and deliver. Basically, she would deliver wood. And one of these nights, it was too cold, and she was doing deliveries, and she got pneumonia, and she was not able to overcome it. And so in 1944, she passed away. They were only married for 22 years and without any children. And that was a very, as you can imagine, that was a terrible hit for Rav Tzvi Yehuda. He never wanted to remarry, although there was pressure that was put on him to remarry, maybe with a young enough woman in order to still have children. And he said something that, again, that's what they quote. I don't know, meaning it's Rav Tzvi Yehuda, he has his own halachic opinion. He said, if HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't want me to have children with Chavalea, then it seems that he doesn't want me to have children at all. It's a very strong sentence. He never got married again. He gave a very moving hesped, a eulogy for his wife at the Shloshim, after the 30 days of her passing, in Yeshivat Merkaz Harav. And in it he spoke about the role of women as the ones that are moving forward the word of Torah. He said, men can sit and learn, but women are the ones that produce the conditions that are allowing the growth of Gdolei Torah. That's how he had put it. Again, it's it's very nice. He was very for Torah learning for women. In his shiurim, women were also allowed to participate and participating. And he was, he had this side in him, a very interesting one. So that was in 1944. In 1947, Kaftet November, the 29th of November in 1947, that's the resolution of the UN for the establishment of Medinat Israel. And some of you may recall, we have these movies and newsreels about the people just spontaneously going to the streets and dancing hora. And Rav Tzvi Yehuda has a beautiful description of what he felt at that night. So if you can please, these pages. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם שהכל נהיה בדברו. So this is from a talk he gave, not at the same year of 1947, but 19 years later, 19 and a half years later, at the Independence Day, at Yom HaAtzmaut of 1967, just a few mere weeks before the 6 Days War. Of course, no one knew that it would be the 6 Days War, but he gives a speech that many saw as prophetic on the Yom HaAtzmaut of 1967 in Yeshivat Merkaz Harav. And here there is a short excerpt from this speech. Source bit. לפני 19 שנה, so 19 years ago, again, the speech is given in 1967. באותו לילה מפורסם, that famous night, בהגיע ארצה החלטתם החיובית של מושלי אומות העולם לתקומת מדינת ישראל. So when came to us here in the land, came to us the decision of the מושלי אומות העולם, the leaders, the global leaders, right, the leaders of the countries of the world, לתקומת מדינת ישראל, that the state of Israel would be established. כשכל העם נהר לחוצות, so all the people went out to the streets, took to the streets, לחוג ברבים את רגשי שמחותינו, to celebrate and mass our happiness. He says, לא יכולתי להצטרף לשמחה. I couldn't join the celebration. Why? באותן שעות ראשונות לא יכולתי להשלים עם הנעשה. These first hours after the decision of the UN, he said, I could not accept what was decided. עם אותה בשורה נוראה, with this, he says, בשורה נוראה, terrible announcement. כי אכן התקיים דבר השם בנבואה בתריעשר, ואת ארצי חילקו. Says, I couldn't believe that the prophecy that the land of Israel would be splitted had happened. So while everyone was celebrating the establishment of the state on whatever areas the UN was willing to give us, he said he couldn't accept it. Why? And here you see this conflict between what is happening in actu and the ideal. And he is now, these two forces are combating within this man, within Rav Tzvi Yehuda. Because in the ideal world, in what he visions, the state of Israel should include, of course, all of the western side of the Jordan, but also the eastern side of the Jordan. Nachalat Bnei Gad uvnei Reuven should also be part of Eretz Israel. And here, you are being given, after 2,000 years, you are being given a sovereign state, but it's only on part of the land that belongs to you. And that is a collision between the ideal and the reality. And he said they sat there and they couldn't join the people celebrating outside. את איפה חברון שלנו? Where is our חברון? אנחנו שוכחים את זה? Can we forget the city of our fathers, of our mothers, of חברון? איפה יריחו שלנו? Where is Jericho? אנחנו שוכחים את זה? Can we forget it? איפה עבר הירדן שלנו? said the eastern side of the Jordan. איפה כל רגב ורגב, כל חלק וחלק של 4 אמות של ארץ? He says, we cannot even lose sight of 4 cubits, 4 אמות of ארץ ישראל. הבידינו לוותר על איזה מילימטר? Can we accept to release even a millimeter of the Holy Land? חלילה וחס ושלום. באותו מצב מזועזע בכל גופי. So he says, I was shocked with all of my body. פצוע כולי וחתוך לגזרים. So he had this bodily feeling that just as the land is being splitted, he said, I felt that my own body is being split. That's a love of Eretz Israel. He felt that he is being torn apart. לא יכולתי אז לשמוח, he couldn't celebrate. למחרת, so that was the night. The next day, בא אל ביתנו איש ברית קודשנו, הגאון רבי יעקב משה חרל"פ זצ"ל, רב חרל"פ was one of the students of Rav Kook. And he comes to Rav Tzvi Yehuda, and they both feel the same. היה לו צורך לבוא, כלום ייתכן שלא היה, he felt the need, he felt the urge to come. Couldn't he come? It was clear that he would come. So I knew that he would come. התייחדנו אז שנינו רגעים אחדים, באותו חדר קטן ומקודש בבית הרב. So we both sat at the small room that Rav Kook used to sit in. So again, he needed this inspiration from his father. What would have my father said? I'm sure that everyone here that his father is not in this world anymore. From time to time, right, when he meets a challenging situation, circumstances, we ask ourselves, what would Abba say? Now, for him, of course, for Rav Yehuda is Rav Kook. That's he sees himself as a channel to the Torah of his father. So he sat there in this small room with the close student of Rav Kook, and they both thought, what would Rav Kook have said about this collision between what you want to have, what you think you should have, and what you can have? מזועזעים ישבנו ודמומים. We sat there shocked and silent. לבסוף התאוששנו, till we were both recovering. אמרנו שנינו, he said, we were simultaneously, we both said, מאת השם הייתה זאת, היא נפלאת בעינינו. So that came from Kadosh Baruch Hu, and היא נפלאת, it is beyond us. But we must accept what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is giving. I heard from Plina once, regarding a certain question that a family that came to be advised with us. And Plina said, Plina said, my wife said, that sometimes in order to accept the child that you have, you must release the vision of the child you wanted to have. Otherwise, you won't have both. And that's in this conflict, as we said, this collision between the ideal, the vision of Eretz Israel HaShleima, and the reality of what you can get. Now you can say, no, so I'm not interested. The Haredim, in many ways, said that not because of the question of Eretz Israel HaShlema, but because they thought that a Jewish state must be Jewish. It must be according to Torah, according to... If that is not the case, we are not interested to take part. Of course, Rav Yehuda also vision was a Jewish state that goes by the Torah. This is not a question, it's our vision. However, now that the reality hands you something else, do you accept what was given to you and aspire, of course, to improve it as best as you can? Or do you say, I prefer to stay with the dream in the price of giving up what HaKadosh Baruch Hu has given me? That's, I think that all of us can understand that's not a simple question. That's not a simple question. For 2,000 years, the Jews dreamt about a certain way the redemption would look like. There would be a big horn sounding, and all the Jews would go, and the land would be cleared, and all the goyim would run away, and we would establish our own state. Beautiful dream. But since that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants it to play out a little differently. So what do? Do you say to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, no, thank you, we would stay in exile, and we would wait till the reality would match our dream? Or do you say, I keep on to the vision, but I understand that I should also take hold of the particular, of the reality as it is, and try to see how can I advance it? As I said, that was the big Torah of Rav Yehuda, because most of us, as I said, would fall to one of these two categories. Would either take on the dream, remain with the dream, and abandon reality, and then just enclose ourselves and close ourselves from reality. And as the train would continue to go further, of course, we would be more and more obsolete. The other way is to cling to reality, but to completely let go of the dream, of the vision. That's also not good. Can you hold to the dream, but also remain connected to what is given to you and aspire to the best that you can, to the best of your abilities, to slowly get the reality nearer to where you think it should be? And that was what Rav Yehuda was able to achieve. Another beautiful example of that, here in source Aleph, that's also from 1947. That is a letter he wrote to the head of a certain high school in Yerushalayim. I would not give you any more details because it would be understandable from the letter itself. So let's just read. This is a short letter he writes to the headmaster of school named Sokolo. He says, היום בשעות שלפני הצהריים, today at the early noon hours, בעברי על פני בית הספר והלאה לרחוב יפו-בן-יהודה, so I was walking on the street, and I was walking through your school towards יפו-בן-יהודה, ראיתי כי מתוך חבורת ילדים יוצאי בית הספר, פגעו איזה, so I saw a few children that were going out of your school, and some of them were hitting, פעמים, ופעם, so a few times, פגיעה שבגוף, so a bodily strike, והתגרות גסה, but also they were speaking improperly. בערבים רוכלי-רחוב. ועבר אז שם פעמים יחד בשני ערבים, אחד צעיר ואחד זקן. שהיו משותפים בעניינים כאלה. So he says there were two Arabs there, one older, one younger, and they were selling something. And the children were going out of school, and they were Zionist children. And so they were, again, I'm not sure what exactly they were doing, but they were harassing, seemingly even physically, obviously verbally, but also physically, these two Arab sellers. זה היה מרחק קטן מן שער החצר, it was only a small distance from the gate of your school. אחר כך שוב בצעיר אחד, then I saw the same children, במדרכת רחוב יפו, לצד תחילת רחוב, and so they were continuing and terrorizing the Arab residents. נצטערתי ונתביישתי מאוד למראה-עיניי, I was extremely sorry and also shameful. נתביישתי when I saw that. מתוך מרוצת הילדים והשתובבותם, לא עלה בידי להשיגם לעירם. He says, I couldn't, they were running, the children were running fast, so I was not able to speak with them. איני יודע מי הם הילדים האלה, מי הם מוריהם ומוריהם. So he says, I do not know who are these children, who are their parents, who are their teachers. Obviously, that's a criticizing, right? He says, I cannot understand from where these children are coming. Who are their parents, who are the teachers. יודע אני רק זה שהם היו יוצאי בית הספר, but I am sure that they came out of your school. לא כולם, כל חבורת הילדים יוצאי בית הספר, עסקו באותה פגיעה. So he says, I want to be clear, not all of the children were harassing these Arabs, אלא איזה מהם, וכמדומני שגם מי מהם אחד נגד זה. So it's beautiful how he's balancing. He says, one of the children also stood against. However, אף על פי כן מציאות העובדה, but however we cannot ignore this fact, שהכיבתני והעליבתני, that pained me, and העליבתני, how would you say, עלבון. Yes, but he says that it felt like they are assaulting himself. Because I was נעלב. Right? I took it to my heart. כאמור, מחייב אותי להעירכם על הצורך בשימת לב חינוכית יתרה ומיוחדת, לביטול אפשרויות שכאלה. He says, you must take care, you are the school. You must make sure that these things would not happen again. גם מצד עצמה של תורת היהדות ומוסרה, it is both from the side of the Torah of יהדות and the moral of the Torah, and also מצד הערך המעשי היישובי והמדיני, also from a practical point of view, של משמרת דרכי שלום ויחסי, we need to keep good relationship with our neighbors, יחסי שכנים, these are our neighbors. So you see a man that on one hand can say very clearly, very loudly, we believe that all of Eretz Israel should belong to us. And because that's the truth, because God gave us Eretz Israel. And he's not ashamed to say that. But on the other hand, that does not block him from saying that any harassing, chas v'chalila, violence against specific individual Arabs that do not fight you, that do not try to stop you from having the land, that's completely, he says it's not only asu, he says it's shameful. It's regrettable that we would see young Jews in our homeland that behave to the stranger in these ways, that is against the essence of Torah. Now, again, unfortunately, most people would not be able to hold to do both of these sides. Mm-hmm.
It's very hard.
Very hard.
When you go, I was like in a sport, okay? To win opponent, you have to hate him at this moment. You have to hate. If you're gonna laugh, you're never gonna win anything. You know, like it's gonna be, you know, like not. It's gonna be mushy. Even in sport, how can you win if you're gonna laugh?
Yeah, I agree. You need to be a great man, a big man, in order to be able to include these opposite views within you. Because most of us are narrower, and we need to be all focused in one edge. However, big people can include both sides, and it's extremely important to have these people to guide us. If you see the title that I gave to the page, Rav Tzvi Yehuda was very used to say that we need two aleph, ahava and emunah. Ahava, love, and then faith. Again, many people that have strong faith, they find it difficult to express love because there is their faith, and anyone that is even slightly moving aside, not completely conforming to what they believe should happen, then it's very difficult for them to handle him. Other people have great love for others, but then they find it difficult to have their derech, to have their way, because they are always being dragged after whoever is next to them. Rav Tzvi Yehuda said we must be able to hold to both emunah and ahava, to have very clear faith, to know what is and what is not, what is black and what is white, what is good and what is bad, and still and at the same time have love for everyone. I think it's a tall order. No question that it's a tall order. but that's the inspiration. That's why we learn about. If we would learn about people like us, we would not advance much. Learning about these great rabbis is in order to give us this push to advance ourselves, to lift ourselves. During מלחמת השחרור, the Independence War, he is encouraging his students of the yeshiva to go and recruit to the army, to the Hagana, to Yerushalayim, to the defense in Yerushalayim. And some Rabbanim that were opposing the recruitment, the Giyus, so they found a letter that Rav Kook wrote to the English Prime Minister. If you remember, at the time of the Second World War, Rav Kook was stranded first in Switzerland and then in England. And when the English government wanted to draft the Jewish yeshiva students, then Rav Kook wrote a letter in which he urged the English Prime Minister of then to exempt the Jewish yeshiva students from army service. And some Rabbanim found this letter, and they made a pashkevil out of it. And in all of Yerushalayim, they put this letter saying that yeshiva students should be recruited from, should be exempted from draft. And Rav Yehuda, he wrote and published an opposing pashkevil. He said, you are taking the Torah of my father and you are twisting it. Because he didn't say it about Medinat Israel. He spoke about yeshiva students in a foreign land, not in the Jewish homeland, not fighting for Medinat Israel. And so he was in favor of recruitment during war. Although it has to be said that after the war, when it was not war, he was very much in favor of yeshiva students not being recruited. He was not in favor of programs like the Hesder, which I personally was taught and educated on and believe in and myself served in. He believed that yeshiva students should only go during actual war. But during what, if there are in Medinat Israel, what can be defined as peace times, then they should be exempt. Part of the question is, I think, is basically, just as I said, is a practical question. Can we really define our situation here in the last 70-something years? Can we define it as peace? It's a complicated question. But returning, that's also part of the. You're right. You're right. You're right. You're absolutely right. As I said, I'm coming from a different angle from him, but I'm just, it must be intellectually honest that if I'm describing his position during מלחמת השחרור, that it also describe it as it was in other times. Now, how would he define our situation right now? That's, I don't know. I mean, he's not with us for more than 40 years now. But I don't know. I don't know. After the war, for the next 10 years, and after 1948, for the next 10 years, he was still editing the books of his father. As I said, he saw himself as enabling the Torah of his father to be disseminated, disseminated throughout the land. But the yeshiva was not in a great shape because he was so much busy with the books and he didn't take the time needed in order to grow the yeshiva. So Yeshivat Merkaz Harav was a few dozen students. And them also, I mean, I'm not saying anything bad about them, but it was not a leading yeshiva in any formal way. In 1955, there was a revival of the yeshiva. It came from Bnei Akiva. And there was a group in Bnei Akiva that said, we want to be more serious. And they they understood that the Torah of Kook is what should lead Bnei Akiva and what should lead the new generation. And they want to have a connection, a kesher with it. And how can they have a kesher, a connection with the Torah of Kook? Obviously, who is son, who of Yehuda. So it was called Garin Gachelet. There was a lot of research done on these people because they really changed the face of Tzionut Datit. And they went as a big group to Yeshivat Merkaz Harav and basically changed the whole institution. The yeshiva got bigger in size, but more important in quality. In 1964, they already needed a new house. the yeshiva, because it was Baruch Hashem Guru, it was so big. And he was teaching his students. Everyone that speaks about him speaks about the love that he had to his students. You have to remember he was lonely. He didn't have a wife, he didn't have children. He saw, and he spoke about it with his students. He saw them as his children. And he invested everything that he had in them.
What kind of...
Slightly older, meaning they would usually be in some other yeshiva and then come to... Now they would call them more Haredim, yes. They were Yerushalmim, so these are not exactly the same definitions, but they were the old Yerushalmim. They were modern or open enough in order to learn in yeshiva that carries the name of Kook, but they were not what we describe nowadays as, they were not classic mafdal. I think we can say that in the yeshiva, what he taught, he called it, this is the title that he gave it, HaTorah Goelet, meaning Torah of redemption, or even better, the redemptive Torah. The Torah itself is redempting the people. And he gave 3 characteristics that needs to be in the Torah teaching in order for it to have this redemptive quality. One is the Torah should be learned at whole, meaning do not cut slices of the Torah and learn only them because they are convenient to you. So only halacha and let's ignore hashkafa, or only Gemara and let's ignore Tanakh. Why? Because Gemara is about halacha, is about the things that we can do in Chutz La'aretz. Gemara was written in Chutz La'aretz. But the Tanakh, that speaks about wars, about kings. These are things, prophets. These are things that we are far away from. He said, no, we return to our land. The Torah must be again learned in full. The reduction of Torah to halacha only, that's an exile phenomena. But here in Eretz Israel, Torah should include much more than just halacha. And so Tanakh came into a part of the study program. Also, you may say, machshava. For us, it is simple. It's basic that in yeshiva, students learn also hashkafa, machshava. And they learned of Kook books, or Soloveitchik books, or other books of Saxon. But that's a new phenomenon, it's a new thing. It's a new thing. The most that people learned in the yeshivot of Europe was what was called Musar. Musar is not machshava. Musar is just motivation, inspiration to learn more. Very needed, very important. But it's not machshava, it's not hashkafa, it's not an attempt to give you an overview of the situation of the world of our times. And so Rav Yehuda believed, again, in the wholeness of Torah. Also, as I said, a second level, a second step to have this redemptive Torah is to learn Torah through the lenses of our generation. Meaning to say, you can learn Torah in Lithuania or in Tunis, or in Russia, or in Spain, in the 50th century, or the 19th century, or the 10th century. It's the same Gemara. It's the same Torah. It's completely disconnected. You enter a yeshiva in Lithuania, and ideally at least, you are disconnected from what is going on around. That was the whole program of a yeshiva. They saw it as Tevat Noach. Outside, there is the Mabul, and inside you are saved. And you should sever all connections from the exterior. And Rav Yehuda said, no, that's a mistake. Or maybe I wouldn't say that's a mistake. That may have been good, again, for the exile. But we are here in Eretz Israel. How can it be that we just take the model of yeshiva in Chutz La'aretz and copy it to Eretz Israel? Here we should not disconnect in order to learn. Here we must reconnect. We must learn the Torah through the lenses of our times, and we must see our times through the lenses of Torah. So that is the second characteristic of this redemptive Torah, Torah Goelet. And the third one was Torah must be learned out of love to Am Yisrael and out of recognition of what he called, it's from his father, Sgulat Am Yisrael. The origin is in the Kuzari. סגולת עם ישראל means that that's like a family. So if I have a sibling, I don't have brothers, so it's easy for me to speak about brothers. So if I have a brother, then regardless of what he will do, the mere fact that he is my brother, that is what builds the connection. So I may like what he does, or may not like what he does, agree, disagree, vehemently oppose. But as long as we are brothers, we are connected. That is Gulat Israel. So there is something special in every Jew, regardless of what maybe he does not realize, not realize mentally, and not realize, meaning not taking it into reality. But if he is a Jew, he's a Jew. And we even if he does not, we must recognize this inner point in him. And we must try to connect to it. So that was the third level. So again, 3 levels of redemptive Torah. One is learning of Torah in its entirety, not slicing it. Second is, excuse me. Second is looking at Torah through the lenses of our generation and looking at our generation through the lenses of Torah. And the third is seeing the virtue of every Jew, any Jew, and the entirety of the Jewish people. And he was teaching it into his students. He was teaching halacha a little, but mostly, he taught him these ideas through Parshat Shavua, through Tanakh, through the books of his father. So he was using different methods, but these were the lessons that he was driving to. And he was known for repeating himself many times. He thought that there is no problem in repeating yourself if what you give is sound. And he was not afraid of that. His students became leaders of obviously of the Dati crowd, but even beyond that. In 1958, there was, in celebration of the 10th year of Medinat Israel, there was a big army march, צעדה צבאית. Parade, thank you. A military parade. And it was done in Yerushalayim. Many opposed, from the Dati side, opposed this parade. As a matter of fact, there is a beautiful recording of Mori Rabbi Rav Lichtenstein, who was a young rabbi in YU at the time, before they made Aliyah. He gave a speech in honor of the 10th year of Medinat Israel, but in it he also criticized this parade in Yerushalayim, because they saw it as kochi ve'otzem yadi. Yerushalayim is a place of peace. It's a place of holiness. You should not parade tanks and cannons through the city. Rav Yehuda, so you can understand. So the Haredi were against it because they were against everything that the Jewish state does. And even the Dati Leumi, most of them were against it because in Yerushalayim it is improper to have a military parade. But Rav Yehuda was in favor. And again, I'm in source Gimel. He speaks about a certain person, I don't know who is he. טען לפניי טענה נוספת. מדוע לא תאסור הרבנות ללכת לחזות במצעד צה"ל? The Rabbanut should ban people from going and seeing this military parade. הרי יש בזה משום כוחי ועוצם ידי. It's a symbol of people that rely on their power, that believe in military. רב ציודה says, אדרבה, to the other side. אין כל פסול בראיית המצעד. There is nothing wrong with seeing the parade. כי כשזוכרים אנו שהשם נותן לנו את הכוח הזה לעשות חיל, אין זה כוחי ועוצם ידי במובן השלילי. כי עם לימוד וקיום של התורה, he says it's not negative. If you remember that God gave us these tanks and these cannons, then this is not opposing the Torah. This is part of the Torah. Part of the Torah is conquering the land. So if these are the means in order to conquer, then that's part of the Torah. לא כולם מקיימים את המצווה בייחוד בכוונה האמיתית. לא כולם אומרים לשם ייחוד. He says, I recognize that not everyone that is marching there really understand that the power came from הקדוש ברוך הוא. However, בסופו של דבר מתקיימת המצווה, וזוהי מצווה. מצוותם של כלל ישראל מוטלת על כולנו. We remember, we have the vision, we have the generality, we have what we know is true. Maybe some of the details, some of the particulars do not understand, some of the individual does not understand, but we understand their acts better than they do. That is how he would see it. So you can understand this was very controversial, but he said, let's say there are kibbutznikim, and they establish kibbutz in Eretz Israel, and they say, we want to build a new Jew. He does not observe Torah or mitzvot, of course not, very far from it. He's a socialist. They have their ideas. And he would say, what you do is beautiful, because you are the messengers of God to rebuild Eretz Israel for the Jewish people. Now, they would see this as an affront. They would say, well, that's not what we are doing. What we are doing, we are building the new Jew. We don't do it because of the old prophecies. We oppose the old prophecies. But you would say, you are unaware to the real value of your own acts. So I can celebrate your acts. Why? Because I believe that you are being, in the end, you're empowered by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And you can either, you are participants, you would want it or not, you are part of the divine plan. It's your choice if you align yourself with the plan, or if you are a parent in the plan that you do not, and you do not understand, but you would carry it out anyway. You can understand why many people would feel belittled, right? You do not value what our motives are, what motivates us. תודה רבה. אז זה בסדר, תודה. So, and he finishes his speech, he says, כל השייך אליה, אל המצווה, of establishing the state, כל כלי הנשק למיניהם, all types of weapons, מתוצרתנו, מתוצרתם של גויים, produced either by us or by the non-Jews. כל מה ששייך ליום הזה של קימום מלכות, everything that goes with the establishment and the founding and the security of מדינת ישראל, הכל קודש. Everything is holy. Now again, that is not how I was educated. I think that we should separate between means and goals, means and ends, and sometimes you need to use a certain mean, such as a weapon. It doesn't make it holy. Even a weapon that you used in order to save a human life, you cannot build with the altar with, right? The Torah commands us that iron should not be used when you build the altar. Why? Because iron is used for the production of swords. And it is improper that what is produced for death would be used on what comes to bring life into the world, which is the altar, which is the Mizbeach. And the Torah does not differentiate between iron that is used, swords that are used in holy wars and in unholy wars. So that is how I was educated. But nonetheless, Rav Tzvi Yehuda had this idea that, as I said, because you look at the general, at the big picture, everything that is part of this big picture can be defined as holy. Okay. Yeah, for sure. The question is it holy? Well, even when we acknowledge that everything comes from God, there still can be different levels. And we can still say that we can parade, I don't know, the scientific advances of Medinat Israel through Yerushalayim, but not a military parade. So the question is, I mean, again, I'm giving a shiur about Rav Tzvi Yehuda, not about my own or my rabbi's views. When we come to that, I would speak about that. But it is, again, from an honest point of view, I do want to emphasize, also to understand what is so novel and what is so both intriguing and controversial about these positions. So this idea that if you look at the big picture and it's part of the big picture, then it is holy. It is divine. In 1967, as I said, he gives a speech in Yom HaAtzmaut, in which he speaks about our Hebron and our Janina. No one dreamt yet about liberating these places. But a mere few weeks later, there is an open miracle. People thought that Chas v'Chaila Israel would be destroyed. People ran away. Some people sent their children to relatives in other parts of the world because Holocaust survivors, and they were afraid. And you know that they dedicated a big part of הפארק הלאומי in Ramat Gan as a cemetery because they thought that there would be a war and חס וחלילה there would be tens of thousands of deaths and we would need huge cemeteries in order to bury them all. And Baruch Hashem, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us, it's a giant miracle. And we were able to overcome our enemies, although they were stronger and more in quantity and in quality of weapons. We were able to overcome them, and not only to defend ourselves, but also to liberate huge parts of Eretz Israel. And this young state that was only 19 years old has not tripled its size because of mostly because of Sinai, but also Yehuda and and the Gaza, everything was conquered. And the Arabs were so shocked that in these first few days or weeks, no one stood up. נפל פחדם על כל העמים. Everyone was afraid. And it was, the feeling was of redemption. It was really a redemption. Rav Yehuda was the first citizen, not soldier, first citizen that was brought to the Kotel, because some of his students that were soldiers, because he encouraged them to go to the army at time of wars. So we had some of his students that were soldiers in the Tzanchanim and were part of those that liberated the Kotel. And they said, we must bring Rav Yehuda and the Rav Nazir, both of them, to the Kotel. So they sent a command car, a jeep, an army jeep, to the house of Rav Yehuda. And he was the first citizen to come to the Kotel. And Rav Goren was blowing the shofar. Goren was a soldier. He was the Rav of Tzahal. And they all had a mincha there. So that was obviously great times. And Rav Yehuda stood there, and he found a radio katav, reporter. He found a radio reporter, and the radio reporter was happy to interview someone that was not a soldier, and someone that was older and looked like he knew what he's saying. And he said to him, I quote, ידעו ישראל וכל באי עולם. So עם ישראל and all people of the world must know שבפקודת השם בורא עולם חזרנו הביתה. It's the command of the divine, we returned home. חזרנו אל נחלת אבותינו, we returned to the land of our forefathers. ולא נזוז מכאן. From here we will never move. Immediately after the war, he began to publish his opinion and position, very strong position, that Medinat Israel should not back away from any millimeter, as we saw, right, as he said in his speech, from any millimeter of the liberated places. And also he had a very expensive view, we may say, of what Eretz Israel is. So one can hold that we should not back from any area of Eretz Israel, but is the Sinai Desert, the Sinai Peninsula, part of Eretz Israel. He believed that yes, and also Lebanon, and also the eastern side of the Jordan. So he had a very expensive, he had this combination of very expensive view and also very strong views about not backing away. And he was basically the engine behind of the settling movement in Yehuda, Shomron, and as it was his students, it was in his own push. He himself came to some of the first attempts of settling Yehuda and Shomron in Sebestia, in other places. That was more in already after the Yom Kippur War. He said, again, after Yom Kippur War, many people were in great distress. Because after the euphoria of 1967, suddenly there was a complete crash down. We believe that we are the great empire. Kochi v'otzem yadi really was the letter of the day. And suddenly, this great Tzahal completely failed, completely crashed. And we were not able to understand what our enemies are doing. They surprisingly attack us, and only in the skin of our teeth we were able to escape. And he said, no, we should see that as an awakening call, and not as something that should break us, but as something that should strengthen us. Of course, the lesson to our days, I think, is clear. And this is the message, the lesson from Yom Kippur War is that the problem was that we did not settle these new lands that we have liberated. We have kept them empty. And by that, we have fueled the dreams of the enemy that they can take it back. But if it would be settled, then they would understand that it's ours. That if we would convince ourselves that it's ours, then they would also accept. That was, his position. And so he motivated his students to settle the land. And here again, very controversially, he motivated that and encouraged that even when it was against the position of the government and the army. And he just basically forced his way because he believed that this is, as I said, you look at the general, look at the particular. So here there are a few particulars that do not understand the importance of the general picture, which is to settle Eretz Israel. And we should work according to the big plan and not according to the small details that do not sit down. And here you see, again, as I'm trying to emphasize, this is the greatness, but this is also what people can see as problematic or even dangerous. Because when you follow the great plan and you are not paying enough attention, I would say, to the details, that can cause a rip, a conflict that maybe you as a great man are able to hold to both sides, but the regular people may not be able to. And that set the stage, as you can understand, for many of the conflicts that we are involved in externally, but mainly internally in Eretz Israel as we are here. He was greatly opposed of the idea, the formula of land for, as you can imagine, of land for peace. And so when there was a discussion between Begin and Sadat, and people here celebrated the first peace treaty, he was mourning that Am Israel would back from Sinai. He couldn't accept it. It was very, very difficult for him. And that I mean, he did not die young, but everyone that knew him says that shortened his life. He was niftar, he passed away in 1982. But his legacy is extremely present to this day. Many, as I said, of the Rashi Yeshivot in the Zioni Dati crowd, his very students, I mean, learned from him directly. And his Torah, which he would, I guess, define as the Torah of his father, just channeled through him. And it is correct. But as always, with every pipe, when you move things through the pipe, they get also the shape and the taste of the pipe, which is fine, which is what it should be. And so he emphasized certain elements in the Torah of his father, but also other elements may have been left aside. The national elements, the redemption elements, they got very front and center. Other elements, such as creativity, the individual, certain spiritual elements, he thought that they are less crucial where he was standing. Now, maybe that if he was alive with us today, he himself would have said that other elements would also now be forwarded. I don't know. But that's the color that he gave to the Torah of his father, I think, to this day, in many places, is how the Torah of Kook is understood. In other places, and again, I'm coming from a slightly different stance. So Rav Amital, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, that he learned a lot from Rav Harlap. As I said, he was a close student of Rav Kook. And so he saw himself as having a different picture of Rav Kook and his Torah from what Rav Yehuda was teaching. So again, these questions of how to exactly explain or understand, and more important, how to imply the Torah of redemption to our generation, this is a question that Rav Yehuda had a very strong position in. There are also other positions and opinions. And obviously we now, 40 years after the passing of this great man, of Rav Yehuda, there is a lot that you can learn from him. But also there are questions that we must ask about how we should advance from here forward. Thank you for joining us. And Be'ezrat Hashem, next week we will continue.